Good. I'm Bonnie Buckalew, here to talk about saving civilization one tomato at a time. Yeah.
Nice acoustics in here.
Yeah, we'll get a nice echo.
We had birds in here yesterday.
Oh, did you? Yeah, there was a group earlier today. I think they were hiding out from the rain.
Yeah. Little noisy birds too.
You need anything before you get started, or you're good?
I'm good.
She's here at 8:30.
Okay. Prepared.
I was just concerned that, I have the latest version of PowerPoint and sometimes people don't, so I need to jiggle around a bit.
That's great, yeah. I like people prepared.
Yeah.
You're
yeah.
a veteran, I can tell. A veteran presenter.
I teach at MSU, classes of 250, so
Yeah.
that gives me some experience.
Well, I don't think we're going to
with
have
tech talk.
250 today.
No. I've got 239 in my online class, and almost 230 of them are in China.
Wow.
So that's kind of weird.
But you don't give much homework.
I actually assigned them a paper, which you really shouldn't do with them.
No.
I've been buried for weeks.
Yeah. Well, yesterday was an immaculate day, so I guess we're paying for it today.
I guess so.
What was the turnout yesterday?
Medium.
Just curious what day.
Good to
Yeah.
see you.
Yeah. It was pretty good attendance at the work. Small, but it's 65 or 85.
Today, it's gonna rain.
Yeah. Today we expect it to be our big day, though. That may be changed.
If they swim here, I just keep wondering how much my septic system can handle.
Oh, it's been a wet line.
Really.
You cutting back on using the calls?
Yep. Don't do clothes as often, that sort of thing. Don't run the dishwasher very often. Because they're standing oil really well.
Yeah. Well, the plants are loving it.
Yes, except the irony is I have a hoop house, so all of my garden doesn't get this.
Oh.
I still have to go out and water the hoop
Can't
house.
roll the roof back.
Yeah, can't roll the roof down, yeah. Now, I don't know whether, I think she was coming in here. I think we'll wait for her to get back.
She may be over in the other.
She left her things here.
She's standing outside.
Probably using the restroom.
That's what I thought. This will give me good practice, though. I'm in the process of writing this book. I'm about a third of the way through, and I need practice in delivering a message, so it'll help me frame the last part of the book.
The title of the book is?
Saving Civilization, One Tomato at a Time.
Should be easy enough to remember that.
Should be by now. I've been
Why
saying
tomatoes?
Huh?
Why tomatoes?
Well, that's one of the things I talk about. The tomato's a perfect symbol.
Really?
Yeah.
I like them.
See? Well, we are exactly at 9 a.m., but I'll give her 2 minutes if we don't see
I would
her.
love a little rainbow right here.
Yeah. I think we may just have this cozy little group, so. I guess I will go ahead and get started. Oh, here we have somebody else. Might as well give it a minute here. Everybody but I was smart enough to bring an umbrella.
And I've got one with me that I haven't used for years.
Well,
So the four of us are going to save civilization.
you're all going to save civilization. See, growing a tomato is a radical act. That's what we're going to learn about. Whoops. I'm going to use these, I guess. There we go. I am Bonnie Buckalew. I teach journalism at Michigan State University. But in many ways, the real reason that I am here is because I'm writing a book called Saving Civilization One Tomato at a Time. This will help me clarify the ending. I'm about a third of the way through, and it combines a bit of memoir about my life with also some essays and call to action about what I think we need to do about food. And the reason for that is because I spent 13 years as managing editor of Michigan Farmer magazine many years ago. I was hired kind of on a fluke. I had really no experience with being around farms, and the editor thought it would be smart to get somebody with a fresh perspective who could maybe cover the social, cultural, and political aspects of agriculture. And so from 1970 to 1983, I had a front row seat to the change from what I would call traditional agriculture to industrial agriculture. And I watched all of the changes that occurred and what that really meant in some ways, not only for our food, but for our energy policy. And what I was hoping to talk about today was to kind of tie the two together. People I know have come to this event looking for ways to be able to reduce maybe their personal energy consumption or switch to greener ways of having energy in their own home, whether it's solar. I myself have geothermal. Many of us are looking for those kinds of ways to solve energy problems. But what I'm hoping to talk about today is that we do all eat, and everybody eats, and the food that we consume is a huge contributor to the overall energy picture that we have. And so I was hoping to talk today about how that fits in and things that we can do at both a policy level but also at a very personal level to start making some changes about how the kinds of food we consume, where we get our food from, how much of our own food we can grow ourselves, and then how we can move away from, I think, what is the problem with the American diet, which is so much processed food. And I was hoping that you might tell me, there aren't very many of you, but why you came today and what you'd like out of the workshop so that I make sure to hit your priorities. And yeah.
I was looking to learn more about how I can better utilize my garden.
What kind of garden do you have?
I have a vegetable garden. I just put in raised beds this year.
Oh, cool.
Cedar boxes.
Cool.
December is fine.
So you're thinking how you can start making that more productive?
Yes.
Other things you can do with that. And you just wandered in here to get out of the rain, I know that's it.
Not just that reason, no.
So do you garden? Do you?
Yeah, I'm a gardener. I'm energy conscious. I have a solar system on my home. I have geothermal. So I'm in many aspects energy conscious. But for gardening in particular, I'm a big vegetable gardener and do a lot of canning.
Oh, you do canning?
I usually produce way more than I can eat, and I donate probably 500 pounds.
Wow! To the local food bank?
Yeah.
Ah, great.
So I think the title of your talk got my attention. So.
Good, good.
We just put in solar energy and just got up and running a couple weeks ago. And I've had a garden for 40 years. And I grew up with my mother having a garden. She's 91 and still gardening.
Really? That's why she made it to
Grows her own
91.
stuff. Yeah, yeah. She
Yeah,
takes
good.
no prescription drugs.
See?
She's really healthy, and I really think that food is a big part. Nutrition is a big part of health.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I'm part of like a social justice committee with. I have a church in Florida and one here that we do a lot of working with trying to promote sustainability and educate people about what makes it more sustainable. And so I guess I'm interested about because I've heard blueberries aren't sustainable, but they're so good for you, and I don't know. I guess I
The
want to know.
trade-offs are enormous, aren't they?
What?
The trade-offs are so
Yes,
difficult.
there are trade-offs, and my garden's organic, and I guess I know about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 for organic things, but I guess I want to know more about what I should be eating, and we don't buy much processed foods, but I'm sure there's more to it than that.
I had two thoughts. One is, I probably couldn't feed myself year round. Doesn't seem like.
It's not, no, but we
And
can
then
certainly
the other
move in
thing
that
is,
direction.
the whole agricultural system is based on the consumption of fuel. Because we've taken all the farmers off that used to do this work by hand or by gardening, and we substituted fuel. Well, that can't really continue. And how do we,
It's unsustainable.
yeah, so how do we get back to, I can afford to buy food because I work 40 hours a week.
Right.
But if I had to produce my own food, I couldn't work 40 hours a week. I couldn't do both,
Everybody who gardens knows that I'm really glad that I can go to the store and at least get toilet paper and all those other things too that you pick up at the grocery store, because it would be very hard to be completely self-contained.
Well, or even food that's out of season.
Yes,
I could
absolutely.
probably
Although
feed myself
Michigan
in
is
the
getting
summer.
closer and closer to finding alternatives to that. That's one of the things I wanted to talk, whoops, I keep hitting the wrong button. That's one of the things I did want to talk about. Stats do show that 1/3 of total global warming is attributable to the food system. And that is without even being, I don't know, they're not even counting all of the different ways in which once we get the food home and we cook it on the stove and we have the waste that we have to take away from the house when we throw out the uneaten food, it doesn't even necessarily include all of that. And what we're looking at is a system that I think is totally unsustainable. And I come from somebody who spent many years writing about it and watching that new system come in. And I have high respect for people who are involved in agriculture, because it's sort of like the frog in the pot of water. It gets a little warmer every year, but something's not quite right, but there's no easy fix that you can see. And the goal is, the American farmer is very proud of trying to feed everybody in the world. But the challenge right now is that there's a whole bunch of us. The system itself is contributing to some of the problems that we're going to be seeing. There's the farm and chemical fossil use on the farm itself. There is the methane from the animals, which is a significant contributor. One of the things about methane as a greenhouse gas that you may not be aware of is that it is 22 times more corrosive than CO2. CO2 takes about 50 years. The CO2 we're burning today is going to literally rise in the atmosphere for the next 50 years. That's before it reaches its half-life. Methane's much quicker. It'll reach its half-life in 7 years, but it's 22 times more corrosive to the atmosphere than CO2 is. So animal agriculture is a significant contributor. There's just no way around it. And indeed, the way that we have moved to the CAFO, the large farm, where we have so much difficulty, instead of having manure when your mother grew her garden, a little local manure was a good thing, and you composted and you put it into the garden, and it was a plus. But when it's these huge quantities of manure that you don't know what to do with, and they run off into our streams and they pollute the air, that's the challenge that we're facing with the new modern system. There's the deforestation of the land that takes place as people need more food. We're growing from our current 7 billion up to 9 billion within the next 50 years. I'm not sure how we're going to feed all those mouths. There's transporting all of that produce from one area to another. When I pick up that strawberry at Meyer and I see that it comes from Chile, I realize that that's a tremendously long distance with a lot of fossil fuel costs to be able to bring that strawberry all the way up from Chile to come up here to be sold to Meyer. And by the time it gets there in a refrigerated truck, which is in many cases, all the produce from California is 7 to 10 days old by the time you see it on the shelves, because of the transport time that it takes to bring it here and the fossil fuel use. Each day there's a significant decline in the nutritional value and in the phytochemicals and micronutrients in those food products that we're eating. USDA did a study not too long ago. They took 14 foods, they took a look at the nutritional content a couple decades ago and the nutritional content now, and they found out the nutritional value had declined by 14%. So you have to worry that the food that you're eating may not be as good for you, even if it's just fresh fruits and vegetables, simply because of the transport time that it takes to get them to you. I wanted to give you a little bit of a history of my time at Michigan Farmer because I think it was so illustrative. I watched as chemical agriculture took over. By weight, 40% of the food that we eat is basically natural gas. It's because of the nitrogen that's in the food that comes from the anhydrous ammonia that's used as fertilizer for the crops that we're eating. Farmers inject anhydrous ammonia into the ground in order to fertilize corn, wheat, and soybeans, which is what you see in acre after thousand of acre across the United States, and that's now made from natural gas. So basically, 40% of the weight of what you're eating is made up of natural gas. And so when we talk about fuel savings, think about the fact that almost half of the weight of the food that you're eating is coming from natural gas when you're eating commodity crops. So I watched as we made this shift from using manure as a source of nutrients for plants that builds the soil and builds that whole soil web that lives below, to injecting a very corrosive form of natural gas into the soil. We should also know that the pesticides that we're using, many of which have a fossil fuel base somewhere along the line, basically were nerve gas. There were lots of supplies of nerve gas left over from World War II, and nobody knew what to do with them. They found out they'd killed bugs. So they decided to spray them on the ground in order to kill the bugs, so that's the way in which we're growing our food. In some ways, what we've decided to do is to treat the soil not as a natural living organism that supports healthy food, but almost as if it's gravel. And we're going to throw in whatever it takes to be able to feed that plant, whether industrial chemicals that we're using in fossil fuels, and hope that everything, it looks pretty, it looks great. I mean, look at that lush field, it looks great. But the challenge is it really nourishing us and is it nourishing the world? This is an example that I wanted to show you. David Lichtwager is a photographer. And this reminded me of what it is that I saw. This is he takes 1 cubic foot of earth for 24 hours, and he captures all the life that goes through it. Photographically, he captures it, where the little bugs, birds, anything that goes through that 1 quarter. And he takes these pipes and puts them in the ground all over the world. This is in Costa Rica. So he takes a picture of this 1 cubic foot of earth, and this is from Cape Town, South Africa, what's inside that 1 cubic foot. So he shows us all of the life that occurs in that 1 cubic foot. I'm sorry, this wasn't Costa Rica, this was Cape Town. Now, this is Costa Rica. Look at all the life that occurs in that 1 cubic foot. This is an Iowa cornfield. And I can't think of any more dramatic way to sort of drive home the point of what it is that I'm talking about, which is I don't think this system is ultimately sustainable. Because when you look at the millions of acres that are under cultivation, if that's the end result, we're not creating life, we're losing life. And we have to think about how to protect that if we're going to have the soil web that we need to be able to sustainably have food. The other issue I wanted to talk about is we keep hearing a lot about food waste and how much food we're wasting, that 40% of our food is going into the garbage can, and then it ends up in a landfill, and then it ferments and it puts methane and carbon dioxide into the air as it decomposes. And that's a tragedy. What we don't realize, however, is that with the industrial model that we have embraced, 75% of that 40%, 3 out of every 4 pounds of the food, right, that is thrown away before it ever gets out of the field. We have developed a food system that says only the most perfect vegetable will be marketed, only the most perfect cucumber. And so those vegetables are discarded before they make it to market, despite the fact that we have people who can't afford nutritious, healthy vegetables for their families, which is a very sort of insane system, but it's grown up that way, and it's been, we're sort of immersed in it, again, like that frog in the pot of water, where we didn't notice the changes that were taking place. So it's easier, unfortunately, in many cities it's easier to go down the store, or the only convenience store on the block, and get a Twinkie than it is to be able to get an imperfect apple that should have been salvaged as human food, but instead, because of our desire to have perfect food, is discarded along the way. So these are costs, energy costs, and when we're looking at conservation, those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. The next question becomes what happens to the food after we pick it and as we process it. And that, I think, is a real source of concern. We don't always look at the energy costs related to the processing of food. I think of, that's Play-Doh, by the way, and I'm not so sure sometimes Play-Doh wouldn't be healthier than some of the things I see people use. There's new research that's showing that there may be a link to autoimmune diseases with some of the food that we're eating. We already know the link to diabetes. The reason that I put this up here, you recognize what this is? Where this,
Subway.
yes! And what are they famous for? That bread had a plasticizer in it that was used to make the heels on shoes. It's an industrial chemical that was used to put the heels on shoes, and Subway announced that, I'm glad that they say they're going to phase it out, and it's going to take 2 years. Though what we're seeing is that industrial chemicals are finding their way into our food system, and a lot of that is even untracked. We know that obesity is $190 billion a year, 1 out of every 5 healthcare dollars. We would have no healthcare crisis and rising rates if we had a healthier diet in many cases. Childhood obesity alone, 14 billion. We're seeing so many obese kids nowadays. So there are consequences and costs to all of these problems. So why a tomato? Why a tomato? Why am I trying to write about how saving civilization one tomato at a time? I think that the tomato is this great symbol. It started back in 1973. I mean, I remember when I grew up as a kid, I could hardly wait for tomatoes to come in. You'd see that green tomato, and it would seem like it would never ripen. Mine still does. I still I watch them every day and wait for them to get ripe. They were so juicy, so delicious, self-packaged. You could just bite into it, carry it in your hand. We've learned since then that it has phytochemicals in it like lycopene, which is great for prostate cancer. All sorts of nutrients in that are really, they're like prescription drugs inside the food that we eat. And that was what we had from the backyard. Then we saw in 1973, Jim Hightower, who was the director of the Department of Agriculture in Texas, brought out a book called Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times. And he talked about how in a shift to industrial agriculture, we don't prize things like taste and nutrition. We prize things like, can you ship it across the country when it's green without it smushing? So the harder the tomato, the more valuable it was because it could withstand in the winter being shipped from Florida and California. So when you start prioritizing based on those factors that have nothing to do with taste or nutrition, you change what is grown over time. And the consequences of those kinds of decisions when we do this kind of industrialization of agriculture makes a difference. When you pick up a hothouse tomato and you look at the skin and you see the little bubbles, that's because the tomato has been artificially ripened in a facility that pumps in ethylene gas. Ethylene gas ripens tomatoes. It does so naturally in the world, but pumping it in leaves those little bubbles in the skin. Does it make a difference in how we assimilate it in our bodies? Most of that research, frankly, is never really being done, so we don't know all the consequences of those decisions. We take a look at good old ketchup. And what you see nowadays is what is one of the main ingredients: tomato concentrate from ripe tomatoes, vinegar, high fructose corn syrup. What we see is food laced with high fructose corn syrup right now. Why is that? It's because our farm policy encourages farmers to grow as much corn as they possibly can, because we'll subsidize that. We'll pay them a premium when they grow corn. We don't have enough uses. I mean, it goes into animals. It's very important from animal agriculture. But we have all this surplus corn, and the government used to just subsidize that. Now we've found other industries in order to use that corn. There's ethanol, which is environmentally dubious, but we pay in order to divert that. We divert a lot of it into high fructose corn syrup. It has replaced sugar in many cases. But basically what we're ending up with is what I would call candied garbage. The challenge with farm policy nowadays is that if you are a commodity grower, and my husband's family back in Wisconsin has a nice little farm, a couple thousand acres where they grow a lot of commodity crops. They get a nice check. They make $50,000 to $100,000 a year from the government for growing those crops, right? But the reality is, if they tried to take even 5 or 10 acres and grow fruits and vegetables, what would happen is they would take away their commodity check for their corn. The farmers in California have lobbied, and they want to be the ones that supply us all those fruits and vegetables year-round. They don't want competition from the Midwest. That's why you don't see, it's very difficult for farmers here if they do what's called specialty crops. I think of fruits and vegetables as food, not as specialty crops. But the federal government considers them specialty crops. That's what if you grow that here, you better do only that, because if you have it in conjunction with your farm growing wheat, corn, or soybeans, you're not going to get paid by the government for the wheat, corn, and the soybeans. So what we have are these distortions in farm policy that make a difference in what we grow. And I sort of subscribe to the philosophy that Michael Pollan out of Berkeley talks about in all of his books, about how the real way to start to revolutionize what we eat and how we eat it and where it comes from is to eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. Because by the time you look at all of the commodity crops that are being grown to be able to go through animal agriculture, we realize that we could literally solve the energy crisis tomorrow more than we are with transportation if we just all became vegetarian. So the more and more plant foods that we eat, and the more and more we're able to treat meat like a condiment, something that we have on the side of the plate rather than the mainstay of the plate, the more and more we're contributing to reducing that overall energy problem. The first goal, I think, is to start looking at buying local. And even the grocery stores are catching on to the fact that people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that they don't want that food. Why would we want strawberry in Michigan to come all the way from California today when it's coming into season here in Michigan for the strawberries in Michigan? Where are the Michigan strawberries? How come we can't get local foods? Part of the challenge has been exactly what you were talking about. You can't grow strawberries year-round here. You can in California. You can truck them in from California. You can truck them in from Chile. We're looking at certain innovations that may be able to change that dynamic and make Michigan here a regional food hub year-round. But until we do that, we still need to think of a system where as much of the food as possible that we eat can come from local sources. And Kroger's doing it, and now there's a place that, the Foods for Living people here in this area, in Okemos, they're all trying to find local growers. Local growers are forming cooperatives. where they're working with one another, because if I'm not getting a good tomato crop this year, but my neighbor is, if we form a cooperative, the challenge for grocery stores is consistent, reliable supply. They don't want to be able to have just a glut of tomatoes for a few weeks while they all come into Michigan and none for a while longer. The challenge for Michigan as a food hub is to be able to provide that consistent supply. What Meyer is doing to do that is putting up large greenhouses and hydroponically growing tomatoes in large facilities in the state. In many cases using fossil fuels, some are looking at solar. The question is, can we do that without adding to the energy burden? It's great to see a little buy local sticker, but as a consumer, you want to make sure that if you're seeing that tomato in January, is it because somebody is burning a lot of fossil fuels in order to put it into a facility in Michigan in a greenhouse, and maybe that's not a net plus. We are talking about the trade-offs here. It is a challenge. It's very difficult. Consumers have enormous power with the dollars that they spend in terms of being able to influence ag policy. And that's why I'm urging you to be a sophisticated shopper about how just the buy local sticker alone isn't enough unless you know how that fruit or vegetable was grown and what are the conditions that may or may not be contributing to overall energy policy. Shop at a farmer's market. How many of you are from this area? Yeah? Do you go to the Lansing City Market? Do you go to a Meridian Market? Do you go to any of the farmers markets? Which ones do you go to and why?
I'm actually a little bit south of here. I go to the Danville one, sometimes the Chelsea one, and
Okay.
Well, I'm actually from Grand Rapids, so we go to Orchard Street, and sometimes the downtown,
Sometimes
but mostly Orchard.
they've got the longest, a nice one downtown. Yeah.
Usually I'm producing and I don't need to go to a farmer's market. But coincidentally, I went to the Frankenmuth Farmer's Market as an activity for Father's Day. But it was peak of strawberry season and I did not see any strawberries there.
Wow.
All I saw was kale and parsley and the early spices, so.
We're seeing more and more of that. Even the U-Pick places have been disappearing for strawberries in Michigan. It's very sad.
Shocked that there were not multiple vendors there with strawberries. It was peak. I mean, I was picking 10 quarts a day every other day and not one strawberry at the farmer's market.
That's sad.
I'm from Owasso, and there's a farmer's market there, but I'm concerned that some of the vendors have things like cantaloupes, early on, and I'm wondering, are they shipping them in? And so how do you know if it's really local?
This is the big issue. And I did work with the Michigan Farmers Market Association, and it is a real challenge because different farm markets have different rules. Lansing, for example, has a city market downtown. What does that mean, city market as opposed to farmer's market? It means that the truck that goes to Myers can make a pit stop there, and there's no difference. So why are you paying a premium to go to a market that you think is locally grown? And it could be that it is exactly that. It could be, right now we see that there's a strike going on in California that's getting very little coverage. The farm laborers in California are trying not to pick the fruits and vegetables for Driscoll's, one of the largest farms out there. You'll see Driscoll's, and you'll notice a lot of strawberries from Driscoll's are on sale right now. That's because they're trying to move them real fast because the workers make so little they can't afford to feed their families, and so they're busy dumping these onto the market. A city market typically does not have to follow any of the rules of a farmer's market. It means that it could be coming off the same truck, a wholesale truck that goes to Meyer. It's not organic, it's not locally grown, it has none of those virtues, but yet people like to see those trays of vegetables out there with a person standing behind because they think that's that it is they're building a relationship with the farmer. Meridian Farmers Market has been going through out in Okemos, affluent community. Most people think that that's a great farmers market, and it is in many ways. But what they don't always realize is that there are 3 tiers of vendors there. There is the person who literally is just a wholesale, going right down to where any other grocery store can go to buy wholesale fruits and vegetables. There is I buy from local farmers, but I may not be the farmer who produced this. And then the third category is I'm not only the local farmer, but I'm the person who produced that. But if you don't know the grading system and you don't take a look at the chart and you're not careful, you think you're getting something that you're really not. Most people believe that that farmer's market is grown by the person behind the counter, that it's organic, that it's all local, and that may not be the case. So farmers markets are sort of a challenge for consumers. Sometimes it's more cosmetic than it is real in terms of a change in the way that the food is grown. So I just think that that's important for people to understand that farmers markets, you need to talk to the grower and find out. Is it your produce? How did you grow it? Did you have problems with bugs and need to use something on it? And if so, what did you use? Those are the kinds of questions that you need to ask because different markets can have different kinds of challenges. I went out to Titus Farms. One of our graduates at Michigan State University, Rebecca Titus, graduated in horticulture from Michigan State University. Her parents had 22 acres right outside of Leslie. They have a wonderful organic farm. She has decided she was going to get her master's in genetics and go on and become a university professor ultimately, and she just became so enthralled with the new movement of new young farmers trying to go back to the land that she has decided instead that she's been working with her parents and she's going to take over the family farm. It's an interesting challenge nowadays. We see all of these young farmers, and it is called a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. You buy a share, you take the risk with the farmer, you get whatever they produce, and they sort of put together a basket for you, or they have food out that they grow every week, and when you come to pick it up, you can mix and match and make your own basket from whatever's available. If their rutabagas get a bug and they don't come in that year, you don't get any rutabagas. The next year you might get rutabagas, so you take the risk with them. It's a way of engaging community more in where its food comes from and having them support farmers directly, because so often when farmers sell wholesale, the amount of money that they receive is so small that it's very difficult for them to stay afloat. When they can come closer and closer to selling food at retail, then they have a better chance of being able to produce those kinds of fruits and vegetables and stay afloat. Dr. John Birnbaum at the Student Organic Farm at Michigan State University was a prime mover behind this movement early on. Many of the faculty at Michigan State early on bought shares out at the Student Organic Farm, found themselves sharing a share with other people because, as you were talking about, sometimes there's more food than you can possibly eat or even put on. So that's one alternative, because you do build a long-standing relationship with the individual that is raising your food for you. And then in some ways, it's sort of like with the energy crisis. I was around for the energy crisis of the 70s. And you know, you kind of wanted to be that long-standing good customer for your oil supplier if you had a home furnace. Because when times got tough, if they were going to prioritize who they delivered to, it was going to be the person that had been with them for 20 years and not the guy that just signed up last week. I think as we see the shift in climate change with things like the kind of amount of rain we're getting now, we wonder about what's happening. I want a good relationship with a local grower as well, if I'm going to be growing, not unable to grow all my own food myself. The other way that you can address this issue is to become what I would call a yard farmer. And you sound like you're a yard farmer. You're producing so much more than what you're eating yourself that you have excess that you either donate to the community or you find a way to sell it. I have a neighbor who did that with her chickens. She just loved raising chickens. She loved all the beautiful different colors, and pretty quickly she was drowning in eggs and just didn't have enough waste. And oddly enough, she doesn't particularly like eggs. So I was in great shape. I love eggs, so I was buying 5 to 7 dozen from her a week down the road, because I was helping to take care of part of that excess. And she is what I would call a yard farmer. She didn't have a particularly large piece of property, but she was able to maximize the production just because of the passion that she had for what it was she was doing. She just loved the chicken. So this is a movement that I think is now really taking hold in Michigan, where you raise as much as you can from the space that you have. And we can all raise at least something. I love those tomato plants on a deck as they're pretty. Tomatoes are gorgeous, I think. They're prettier than half of the plants that I've ever grown. And I like to see them out there on the deck. And in the same time, they give you that fresh, healthy, wholesome food where not only do you know what it looks like when you pull it off a shelf someplace, but you know what went into it. You know what went into it. We have certification now from the federal government for organics. And when I first saw that movement come in, I was excited because I know that farmers can make a premium when they sell organic. That's one of the reasons they're attracted to making the shift, is that organic food will claim a higher price in the market than traditional food will. We don't want to in this country label it so you can tell the difference all the time, but as to where all of your food is coming from. But in the case of organic, they said we'll develop a little sticker. You'll be able to tell that it's organic food, and people will be willing to pay a premium for it. The challenge, however, is when you put these into regulations, it has been now embraced by the industrial model. The farms in California that are raising organic food, Rebecca Titus, when I went out to her farm, and I've got a little video on YouTube with her and a friend planting from an old tractor as they're putting in the tomato plants in the back, right? And the little family dog is following them. That's not the way it's raised in California. You can't have a dog on the property. They put a swath, a clear-cut swath all around the fields and drain all the ponds around it and get rid of all the wildlife, because the last thing you want is to have a frog get collected when you're picking up the spinach and have a frog in the bag or a frog perch. So we're seeing the surrounding wildlife being decimated. We're seeing the kinds of practices that take place when you make a shift into large-scale industrial farming, putting pressures on the system to get rid of things that we would consider part of not only agriculture but farm life. There's something about farm life. It's being able to take your dog when you walk out to look at the field and not have to worry that you can't have the dog on the farm. Where there are absentee owners who they buy it as an investment and they never see the farm itself. Those are the challenges in the kinds of practices, and they have far more lobbying power than consumers do to pay attention to how to change the regulations to benefit the increasing industrialization of the organic farm. We talk about food miles. If I raise a tomato on my back porch, I can do it and measure it in feet. I walk out in the morning, I can grab a tomato off the back deck, and I have expended no fossil fuel energy to get that tomato. The challenge when we look at the fossil fuel consumption is how many miles is it taking to get things to market. One of the challenges we face when we're making some of these changes right now with things like CSAs is if everybody drives out to the farm to pick up their groceries from the farm, are we saving anything compared to everybody going to mile? In fact, are they driving further to get out to the farm? We have to think of this as a system-wide problem. We may have to start looking at more cooperative. I was talking the other day with a graduate student of mine who comes from Ghana. He took my grants class, and we're working on a project where we're trying to raise some money for him to be able to do it, and he's got a great idea for the farms that the women have back in Ghana. When he grew up, his mother fed them during the dry season pepper on everything. And I said, what was that all about? And he said, well, if we had enough pepper on the food, we'd drink enough water that she would hope it would make us feel full enough that we would stop begging her for food because we didn't have enough to eat. She would starve herself to feed us, but she'd feed us pepper in the hope that we would be able then to drink all this water and not beg her because we were starving too. He's trying to invent a 6-pot system where local artisans, instead of having women grow their fruits and vegetables in half of discarded tires where all that chemicals are going into the food, he wants local artisans to make clay pots. He wants a system where there would be a 6-pot system and women would be given 6 pots. The 6th pot would be for sand to purify the water that would be used for the water to nourish the other 5 pots. 4 of the pots would be to use to be able to either feed the family or sell at market, and the 5th pot, the proceeds from that, would go back into a community cooperative to be able to support this system and keep buying more pots for home growers. Those are the kinds of small-scale innovations that are very different, being able to make people more food independent. I think we are really limiting our own creativity here in this culture if we don't start thinking of systems like that. I would love to see a 5-pot system on a backyard deck where you would use sand to purify the water from that 6-pot and use it to be able to nourish and water the other plants.
I was trying to find more information on the victory gardens of World War II.
Yes,
Because I heard that something like an astounding percentage
40%.
of produce was raised in these victory gardens.
All the food that was eaten in this country during World War II, 40% was produced in home victory gardens.
So there is some experience, unless it's gone, you know.
I tell about in my book, I was in kindergarten, and at the end of the spring semester in kindergarten, they came in and handed me a bunch of these little brown craft paper packets of seeds. It was a victory garden, right? I went home and planted it in the backyard. And sure enough, we had a tomato by the end of the summer, and we had tomatoes from our own backyard. And I thought that was just a miracle. And it was a miracle. And what we saw at the same time was schools had their own victory gardens. And scout troops had their own victory gardens. So there were organized community groups that had their victory gardens as well. We're seeing a growing community gardening movement.
How much of, if you're a whole food vegan like myself,
Yeah?
how much of your caloric intake do you think I could produce in my backyard? Pretty big backyard. And I produce all my greens and tomatoes and beans. But, you know, they're good for you, but they're not high caloric foods. I guess I have to go to potatoes and maybe ultimately corn.
In terms of making food choices, those are really difficult to do. Because part of the challenge, especially if you're vegan, is being able to balance out getting enough protein, getting all the B vitamins, where are you getting your B vitamins from, are you getting complete and incomplete proteins. But that's, I think, why Michael Pollan says, eat widely and eat by color, and eat as many different colors as you can. You know, if you combine beets with cabbage with all of the different colors, I think that's the smartest route to go, but I think it's a very difficult question to be able to figure out exactly.
I think I'm getting the B vitamins and adequate protein and some more. Can I produce enough calories?
Well, how much are you willing to eat?
Well, I probably eat 6 servings of greens a day
Oh, wow, that's great.
because that's the highest nutrient to caloric ratio.
All of the things that we're learning about how that reduces inflammation in the body, you know, as we age and we see that inflammation is such a huge issue. We see that we're this huge biome now, where the things that live in our gut matter a lot to our overall health. The bacteria that live in our gut. So the more different kinds of vegetables that we put through that gut, the better off we're going to be. You look pretty healthy.
I'm very healthy.
So you should share your diet with us.
I should what?
You should share your diet with us.
Well, essentially, I got on this diet maybe 20 years ago for heart disease, and it's had an incredible payoff in many respects. It's basically a whole food vegan diet because you can go very wrong with different kinds of vegan diet.
Yes.
You don't want to go high sugar vegan, you don't want to go high fat vegan with oils, you don't want to go high processed food vegan. It's got to be whole foods.
Did you do Dean Ornish? Was that it?
Well, there are a lot of writers. Dean Ornish is one.
Yeah.
I think the best proponent of this guy is Caldwell Esselstyn. You know him? He's, interestingly enough, at the Cleveland Clinic, sort of a maverick there, but advocates a whole food vegan diet. But I started with Pritikin, actually.
Oh, Pritikin,
It
yeah.
was back in the 80s, really. And then Dean Ornish, John McDougall is another, Neil Barnard is another. There are a lot of writers.
Eat food, mostly plant.
I would say all plants. I like the term plant-based. I say plants.
Yes. Not plant-based. We can all at least grow something in a windowsill garden. If you're thinking about maximizing production, however, we can start getting more sophisticated and serious about how we're using that windowsill garden during the winter to be able to grow more food per square inch and per square foot in the house. There is nothing wrong with combining that as well with a nice little tank at the bottom where you grow tilapia fish in a fish tank, their excretions end up providing the nitrogen that then is uptaken by the plants, so that you're then feeding the nitrogen into the plants from a natural source. We're seeing more and more of these experiments taking place, even among people who live in apartments in New York City. They'll put in a tilapia fish tank, and then they'll have the windowsill garden that goes up in a hydroponic system that is able to feed, so you end up with your protein source from your fish, you end up with the plants from the nice windowsill garden. So there are more and more innovations coming along. Now, is that going to replace, and that means you never have to go to the grocery store again? Probably not. It means that you can go, if we start taking small and say, okay, my goal this year is that 5% of my food I would raise myself. And maybe then 10% of the food that I would eat during the year would be raised by myself. Is that a realistic goal for what we can start to do? Hydroponic gardening, what are the pluses and minuses? If it's solar, it's not too bad. If you're using a lot of energy and you're producing a lot of waste that way, and heat waste as well, in order to run a large facility in an industrial situation in an inner city. We're seeing Detroit is in danger in my mind. We keep talking about this urban miracle